Fun over the past couple of days. I guess fun's the right word, to get texts from people going, yeah, I've been paying attention to the things that triggered me, and here's what they are. I've gotten a lot of those. Like, I was in the grocery store and I got triggered, or I was in traffic and this happened, or whatever. And so I'm grateful that you guys took me up on the challenge to just pay attention, right? To pay attention over the past few days and just kind of acknowledge, when is it that something is controlling me that's not me and it's not God, right? As a Jesus follower, not everybody in this room is a Jesus follower, and I get that. But if you are a Jesus follower, then the person that should be in charge of your life is Jesus, right? And there's other stuff that's in there. But today, have no fear. Today, I want to have a conversation with you about those people, right? Those people that, here's what I mean by those people. The people that seem to be able to push your buttons faster than anyone else you've ever met. Unfortunately, as a parent, sometimes it's your 6-year-old, right? Why is it that our kids know our buttons better than anyone else on planet Earth? How is that actually possible? They know exactly how to, we're like with a claw machine in the arcade, and they know exactly how to get the stuffed animal out of the bottom of it. It's like they're just perfect at it. They know how to say the things that just rub you the wrong way. Maybe it's a coworker. I don't know. Maybe it's somebody you have to see every day. Maybe it's the guy in the cubicle next to you that chews his gum too loud. Or maybe it's the person who, they're the person in your lobby, or they're the person who's the secretary of your office, and you have to walk past them every day and you get like a snide remark, or they give you kind of a snotty comment or something. Or maybe it's that one person that follows you on everything you do on social media, and it's just the troll that can't let you, have a moment, right? Those people, right? Those people that just seem so well, and they seem to know so well how to make us have a bad day. Now, I also want to acknowledge something, and this is the less fun part. Unfortunately enough, whether you knew this or not, I hate to burst your bubble, but we, including you, are those people to somebody else. I know. Somebody just elbowed their spouse, and that's not okay. Like that I know that happened, right? We are, unfortunately enough, we are those people in somebody else's story. And it took me a long time, arrogant as I used to be, to acknowledge that reality. Right? I may be those people in your story. I don't know. I hope I'm not. I don't know whether you'd stay here much longer. But like those people that just seem to be able to rub you the wrong way, right? Or that they just see the world so differently than you see the world, or their experience, or their philosophy, or their perspective, or the way that their family works, or the decisions they make. They're just so different, right? And it just bugs you. But unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, you need to understand that you are that to someone else. Now, why, right? Why is it that people are usually at the center of all of the things that trigger us most? Why is it that people, human beings, are at the epicenter of most of our stories in which we got angry, or got loud, or got shut down, or emotionally flooded, or whatever else? Why is it that people are there? Well, that's a really great question. We're going to talk all about that today in part 2 of the series we call Triggered. This is a 4-part series where we're talking about trying to discover a better way, right? We're noticing in this world, whether it be through our interactions on social media, like in the fake world, or whether it's in real world interactions, or in our offices, in our homes, in our friendships, walking down the sidewalk, whatever our emotions are boiling over. Everybody's is. And we talked about this. Is it a post-COVID thing? Is it a political tension season thing? Is it an economy thing? Is it all of those things put together? But it just seems like, at least over the past 5 or 6, 7 years, our tendencies as human beings to be able to keep a lid on our emotions, or to keep ourselves in check, has kind of been eroded, right? And we find ourselves in a place where we get set off quicker. Our fuses are shorter. And when I say set off, like we talked about this last week, some of you get loud, right? And you have to be louder than the other person. That's what triggered looks like for you. But some of you shut down. Some of you freeze. Some of you get really quiet, or you get passive-aggressive. How many of y'all have mastered the tactic of the silent treatment in your home? And this is not just wives. This is guys too. Okay, so do not just point your finger at your wife. This is an all skate where you've been offended by something that they do, and the next thing you need to do is make them feel that same offense by being as quiet as humanly possible, right? Or pretending everything's fine when it's really not. Like, I don't know. Triggered can be a lot of different things, but here's the key thing. When our emotions take control, things get out of control every time. When you allow your emotions to be the thing that's driving the bus of your life, things go wrong. Now, I put all my bias on the table. I'm a Jesus follower, okay? And so this is true. This whole when our emotions thing take control, this is true of every human being, whether you're a Jesus follower or not. But just for a minute, for those of you that are Jesus followers, you need to understand like the implications of this, because what's really happening is you're allowing your emotions to take the place of the person you call the King and Lord of your life. Like when you allow whatever has happened to just push you into a frenzy or like find yourself completely out of control, you've actually given control of your life to something else that's not Jesus. And we don't think about it that way, right? We because I'm going to talk about this in a little bit, we justify or we blame or we say, well, this had to be said or this had to be done or they needed to know. Well, did they? And were you in a position to be able to tell them? Those are the hard questions we're wrestling with. But again, back up for a minute. I know not everybody in this room has decided to follow Jesus yet, and I get that, okay? You're still wrestling, and I hope that during this course of this series or another one that's coming up soon, you get to a place where you're ready to cross the line of faith. But everybody can admit, right? I think, I would hope, if you've been paying attention at all, everyone can kind of admit that this is true. Like this is not something I made up. This is not something that's oral preachery either. This is just a truth. It's just how our lives work. At the center of all the regret you have is a moment where you gave into an emotion that you wish you hadn't. You ever think about it that way? Whether it was you got mad, or you gave into lust, or you gave into an addiction, whatever. You gave into something. You justified it in your brain, and at the center of every regret you have is an emotion you wish had not taken control of you, but it did. Now, I've been way more transparent in this series so far. This is only week 2 than I really have in others. But I know this to be true for me. One of the things that I regret the most from my past, the things where I chose something that was not God's best for me, right? In those moments, I completely justified it in my brain by how I was feeling or what I was seeing or what I thought would come from it. And I was able to really easily talk myself into something that I wish I had not done. Why is that the case? Well, because I think my emotions had taken control in that point, not my rational brain, not my faith, right? I'm a Jesus follower, okay? So you're not a Jesus follower, you don't get that one. But for me, I'm a Jesus follower. My faith was not in charge. My rational brain was not in charge. My logic was not in charge. My emotions were. Now, the other thing I want to say about this, if this is the first time you showed up and you didn't get to hear last week, this is really important. This series is not about becoming emotionless robots. 1, because that's impossible. But 2, that's not healthy, nor is that what I think God would have you do, nor is that how Jesus lived his life. What Jesus was able to do, and what I hope that I can someday completely, fully live into, and I want this for you as well, is that he was able to go into really emotional situations, feeling what he felt, but not allow what he felt to drive the bus in the way he responded. He didn't react, he responded. There's a massive, massive difference. Now, we're talking about people today, right? Because that's really part 2. Last week, we just talked about the idea of getting triggered and that this can happen. And hopefully after a week, you've wrestled down to the ground the reality that there are some things in this world that bug you. And you don't know why, maybe. Maybe you haven't fully figured out why those things bug you, but they bug you. I told you some of mine last week. I don't like it when people are discourteous. If I'm standing in line and somebody's giving a waitress a hard time, or someone's giving the person behind the counter a hard time, I get bugged by that, and I usually say something stupid. I wish I didn't. I've told this story before, but my wife and I attended a basketball game. There was a woman who was just obnoxiously drunk in front of us at the game, and was like pouring things on each other. And multiple times, my wife had to grab my arm so that I would not say anything. That's the kind of person who you've allowed to sit in this chair. I'm sorry, just so you know who I am, okay? Like I have a hard time with that, and I have to keep that in check. I think another one of mine, I told you last week, is that I tend to get triggered when I feel disrespect, whether that's disrespect for me or disrespect for someone else. And what I figured out is underneath of that is this desire that I have for people to feel loved, right? That I feel like everybody deserves love and everybody deserves respect, whether you agree with their views or agree with what they're doing or not. I trust me, I have opinions. I promise. I can share them with you all day long. But I don't want my opinions to bring me to a place where I don't treat someone with respect. And when someone else does that, it bugs me, right? It's a trigger of mine. So here's the thing that I learned a few years ago that's underneath of that. People, right? People are underneath of that. Whether they're my family or people on the other side of the thing. And those people, for so many years of my life, I allowed them to kind of control my emotional state, to control what I felt. And here's what I've learned. If people control your reaction, they control your peace. Just let that one sink in for a second, okay? Take a deep breath, breathe that one in, think about it for a minute. If people control your reaction, they're also in control of your peace. Because you don't have control over the outcome of what happens when you react to the people who are in charge of your reactions. Right? I mean, seriously, if someone else is driving the boat in your life, right? If someone else has the wheel, and they are driving how you react and how you respond and how you feel constantly. And look, this doesn't have to be a real person. Here's the crazy thing. We are so good in this world we live in of creating a stereotypical whatever. And we mostly do this over political lines, but it happens in other areas too, right? And we have this really great thing. It's those people or they, right? They just drive me crazy, or those people or that organization or that politician or that group of people or those people who vote that way or those people who think that way. And it's really easy for us to kind of create this straw man of whatever it is that triggers us, and then we just kind of go to work on it, right? We just constantly berate it, or it constantly is in control. But what we don't realize is it's actually control of our peace. We've allowed that thing, that person, that group, that fake idea, whatever it may be, to come into contact and come into control of our peace. And as long as they're behaving in a way that drives us nuts, we won't have peace. Now, nothing I've said so far has a whole lot to do with, like, if you were a Jesus follower or not, you could probably accept most of what I've just said. My bias on the table, I'm a Jesus follower, and you're in church. So I think there's a better way. I think Scripture points to a better way. And I think even in the church, some of y'all are going to hate me for this, but I think even in the church, we've forgotten what that way is. And we justified it by feeling like, well, we're on a crusade, or we're right and they're wrong, or they need to know, or whatever. We've justified it in our brains because of the way it makes us feel, or the way, they did the thing, or, whatever, right? And look, there are things, I told you last week, there are things in this world that should make you upset. There are things in this world that should make you angry. There are things in this world that should bother you. I'm not saying that. But allowing people to control your reactions allows people to control your peace, and then you wonder why you're anxious all the time. And you wonder why you're fearful all the time, and you wonder why you're frustrated all the time. You wonder why you just can't find rest. It's because people are in charge of your peace. And I believe Jesus should be in charge of your peace. I believe God should be in charge of your peace. Now, how do we get here, right? Well, it's a really interesting and profound pathway that I'm not fully qualified to speak on. I'm going to try to talk about it in big pieces, just like I did last week. But I encourage you to do your own research, all right? But here's what happens, all right? Our wiring plus our wounds is what is equal to our short fuse. Our wiring, which is just kind of how we are. Like you're wired by the environment you grew up in, or by the circumstances of your parents or your family values or whatever. You're wiring, the stuff that's defaulted in you. I'm a nerd, so I say your default settings, whatever works for you, okay? But all of us have our default settings that we come with. That's our wiring. Plus the stuff that people have done to us, the offenses that we've taken, or the trauma that's been dealt our way. Look, some of us sitting in this room, if I heard your story and I knew what you'd been through, I would probably react the same way that you do, because of the wound that you have, or because of the trauma that you've experienced, or because of the thing that's happened that you just could not control. It was not your fault. But those things put together, right, our wiring and our wounds, is what's led to this kind of short fuse moment that we find ourselves in, where somebody touches that nerve, right? Somebody touches that nerve, and you don't even know that nerve exists, but they say something oddball, and the next thing you know is like, or freeze. And people are like, what's wrong? Why aren't you talking? What happened? Why aren't you speaking? Short fuse, right? You get loud, or you get quiet, or something in between, or you run away. But they touch a wound, they touch a nerve, and it's only exposed because of our previous wiring and the things that have happened to us, and the next thing you know, we have been triggered. And this is happening all the time. And why it's happening more and more lately, I don't know. Like, I wish I knew. I'm sure studies are going to come out and explain more of this physiologically. But if I might just say, again, my bias, my way of seeing things, I think it's happening this way because we have forgotten that God has a better way for us to do life. I think it's because we have forgotten that Jesus has paved a way for those who follow him to live life a little differently. And as I said last week, you cannot control the things that trigger you, but you can control the one you allow to transform you. You can't control right? These things, these right here, most of the time these things right here are completely out of your control. But there's a variable you can add to the equation named Jesus, who changes things. It's just that we don't always allow him to do it because it feels painful, or it feels like we got to admit something, right? We got to fully admit that we have a problem. We have to fully admit that something's not wired right, or that this thing that happened to us that shaped the way we see the world in a certain way, it happened, and now I have to openly admit that it happened. And if I do that, well then gosh, people are going to look at me differently. And we justify in our brains keeping this to ourselves, but it keeps us stuck in this cycle, which you know is not healthy. And I know it's not healthy. And the people who are experiencing your short fuse, they know it's not healthy either. So, hard conversation, okay? Like, some of you just met me today and I'm already stepping all over your toes. And I love you. I want you to know that. Like, hopefully you'll talk to somebody else in this room that knows I really do care about you. I do. I want what's best for you. And most of the time when I talk about these things, it's only because God had to do that in me, and I may be one step ahead of you or right in the middle of it. But there's a better way. And the Apostle Paul talked about this a little bit, actually, and he modeled this from Jesus. It's a characteristics that become so profoundly distinct in the Christian realm and the Christian world of things. In fact, when I read it to you, you're going to miss the meaning of it, but I'm going to try to explain the depth of the transformation culturally that this statement makes, because it's so radically different than even the way you're wired. Not just culturally, not just politically, not just in America. It is so radically different than the way you're wired. And if it's possible, well, then it has severe and serious and incredibly awesome implications for the way your life could look. Now, Paul said this in the letter to the Romans, which I think is one of the greatest theological things ever written. I think Paul hit a home run. This was his magnum opus. This was his, I'm going to do, like, he put it all in. He pushed all the chips to the center table when he wrote this letter. And what he's talking about here is about relationships within the church, right? So you got to understand that was the original context, but the relationships he's speaking of apply to every place you have a relationship, or every time you appeal to anybody who's a human person. And I would encourage you to read the whole chapter. This is Romans chapter 12. I'm only going to read a little piece of it, but this is what Paul says to a group of people that would hear this letter. Here's what he says. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, do not repay anyone evil for evil. Let's camp in that for a minute, okay? Why would Paul say that? Well, because our natural reaction to an offense, our natural reaction to someone doing something against us, is to repay the favor. That's natural, right? And this can be silly things, okay? This like I think about married life and family life are some of my most common things that I get to experience on a daily basis. The relationships that are probably the biggest breeding ground for all of us to do things right or really wrong. And one of the funniest, most comical things I've learned as a parent, especially now that I have 4 children in the house, is that when one of the kids comes running crying to me, I need to ask the full story about who hit who or who did what before I render judgment. Why? Because if one of them comes running to me saying, my sister hit me, I'll say, well, what did you do? Well, okay, I hit him first, but still, right? Right? I mean, that's what happened. Or yeah, I'm sorry, you're right, I stole that toy first, or I'm wearing their shirt, that's why they took my shoes. That's a big one that's going on right now. She's wearing my pants, so I have her shirt, or she's got my hair clipped, so I took her shoestrings. Like, it was crazy stuff, right? And it's this evil for evil. It's this evil for evil. Now, I don't dare, assume that everybody goes through this, but in my house, that's pretty common. The other thing that happens is in our relationship, especially husband and wife, and I didn't warn my wife I was going to pick on me, so she gets to use this as ammunition against me later, but one of the things we learned early on in our marriage was I was really not great at communicating. I wasn't. She was very open and transparent. Me, not so much. I grew up in a place where my parents, they loved each other. I don't mean that. They just didn't. I never watched them fight. I never saw them disagree about anything. They just kind of ran in their other corners. And so I just thought that was normal. And when we had a disagreement, I just leave. I just walk away. And I left my wife there, this beautiful, amazing, incredible Appalachian woman who has a lot of emotions going, what is wrong with you, right? And so, run away was kind of my common thing. We just won't talk about it. We just won't talk about it. It'd be fine. And to me, that was evil for evil. Her bringing up something that hurt me, right? I felt like that was evil, and my response to that, to make her feel the same level that I felt, was to walk away. And not walk away like I need 5 minutes to work on this. It was walk away like I don't want to talk about this. Evil for evil. The silent treatment that some of you treat your spouses with, it's evil for evil. You know, I'm not picking on us husbands, okay, but I am one, so forgive me, okay? But like when we come home and our wives aren't saying anything, and we're like, hey, how are you? And they're like, just, they're doing dishes like they're trying to strangle the dishes, or they're like sitting on the couch and they're working, or they're typing on their laptop and they're like, hey, how are you? And like, you've done something, but you have no idea what it is, right? Like silent treatment. We have offended our wives in some way and they are responding, or vice versa. Husbands, we do this to our wives too. Sometimes the roles are reversed. Regardless, evil for evil is a natural reaction. Kids do it, students do it, college kids do it, athletes do it. How many times have you watched a basketball game? I know I've seen this multiple times. Or a soccer game, and there's a player that they get a dirty hit, but nobody saw it and it kept going, and then the next play down, they just like, oh, they're the next one, right? And that's the one that gets caught. That's the one that gets, the whistle or the card. That's the one that stops the game. Why do they do that? Well, because it happened to him previously, and I'm going to pay evil for evil. That is the natural reaction. And so here comes Paul. Like, who are you, Paul? How dare you say such a thing? And he just right in the middle of that natural process that happens for all of us goes, don't do that. And we're like, oh, come on. Like, you got to be kidding. This is just how the world works. And Paul says, maybe so, but, okay, narrower worldview, if you're a Jesus follower, that's not how your world works. And it's not just that that's some sort of moral ethic. In fact, Paul actually makes the claim that makes your life better. Not even just the people who you experience, right? Like not even just the people who experience you not repaying them, but your life specifically, your heart specifically will be better if you decide not to repay evil for evil. And I love that he acknowledges down here, like, this is good. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, because he knows, right? Because he knows you're going to experience offense. He knows someone's going to step on your toes. He knows someone's going to push your buttons. Because it happens to us all the time. Social media, right? Somebody cuts us off in traffic. We get that email where the guy didn't read the previous email, and we have to go, per my previous email, which is the most passive-aggressive thing, right? But it's like, somebody is going to step on your toes. Someone is going to offend you. Someone is going to say something you don't like, and Paul knew that. Why would he put it in the letter? Because it probably happened to him too. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful. Live at peace with everyone. Now, some of the way that this happens, I don't know if you know this about yourself, but some of the way this happens is because when people say something, they say one thing, but you hear another because of your wiring, or because of the previous experience, because of stuff that's happened to you, right? Because of wounds, or because of whatever. And someone looks at you and says, I disagree. Or they say, I disagree. You're at a meeting, you're laying out some sort of forecast, or you're saying, here's the things that I think we should do. And one of your coworkers, innocently enough, who has a different opinion or whatever, goes, I disagree. You're at home, right? And you and your spouse are you're trying to make some tough decisions about what to do financially because things are tight right now. And they suggest that there's something that we should do. We should, eat out less, or what are all the other common things we talk about right now, right? We eat out less, cook more, meal prep, we're going to try to drive less or drive one car. Like, you got all these options. And then, your spouse, innocently enough, has a different idea, and they go, I disagree. You didn't hear I disagree, though. What you heard is you're not good enough. Your idea is not good enough because of what you went through. Right? Because of whether it was your childhood, whether it was some previous trauma, whatever, what you heard in your brain was not, I disagree. It was, you're the problem, right? You're the problem. I disagree. You're not good enough. You don't make good decisions. You don't have good ideas. And that's what's going off in your brain, but that's not what they said. And so then what happens? Well, you get emotionally kind of like amped up and you get all uncomfortable. Somebody who you haven't run into in a while, who you'd really love to hang out with, says this. I'm just too busy right now. Like, I'm just busy right now. And we're like, look, we're busy. Okay, I was talking to another parent. This is banquet season, which means like every kid that you have is going to some banquet that you have to pay for and go to and get the ribbon and the trophy and all the things and watch all the pictures. And you got to do it like 25 times, and they're scheduled at the most ridiculous times ever. Not that I'm triggered by that or anything, okay? And it's concert season, and it's end of the year season, and it's final soccer game season, and all the things, right? It's graduation, and so you are stretched thin, right? You are stretched thin. and you don't know how you're going to make your next thing. You don't even know how you're going to get food, not that you don't even have it in the fridge. How am I going to get it from the fridge through the stove and into their stomachs, because I don't know how I'm going to cook it. I don't have the time. You've bought more McDonald's than you've ever bought in your life during this season of time, right? You're just busy. So you run into somebody and they want to hang out with you, and you say, I'm just busy right now. And then they get really mad and they get really offended, and you don't know why. Well, it's because they didn't hear you say, I'm just busy right now. They heard you say, you don't matter to me. That's what they heard. You didn't say that. Heck, you didn't even think that, right? And maybe the roles are reversed. Someone has said this to you, and they didn't say that. They didn't even think that. It's just the reality of the season they're in. But what you heard was, you don't matter to me, because you have experienced that before. You've experienced someone in your life before going, you're just not worth my time. Maybe it was your parents. Maybe it was their former girlfriend, boyfriend. Maybe it was a friend that you thought was really close to you, right? You don't matter to me is what you hear when people say they don't have time. One more. You run into somebody, and it's someone you've had a disagreement with, right? It's someone who you feel tension with them, and you don't really know why, and so you've kind of been avoiding them. But then you run into each other, and one of you, them, whatever, this statement comes out. I think you misunderstood me. I think there's just a misunderstanding. I feel like maybe like you were here and we were talking past each other, and we just, you didn't understand me. You don't hear, I think you misunderstood me. You hear, you're the problem. Because in your brain, you can't translate misunderstanding to mean anything other than that must be your fault, because of your wiring, or because of your upbringing, or because of some trauma. And in your brain, constantly, all these conversations are going off all the time, which means we are immediately trying to get all that pain off of us, and we start blaming. And blaming them feels so justified because it makes you feel better, right? It immediately they just didn't, can you believe them? Can you believe they would say that? Can you believe they would think that? Oh my gosh. And then you just kind of heave all of your emotional junk on someone else, even if they're not in the room. Blah, right? And it's easy if it's someone who's a friend outside of your immediate circle, but listen, this is happening in our homes. We're doing this to our spouses. We're doing this to our kids. We're doing this to our significant others, right? Our boyfriends, girlfriends. We're doing this to people who matter to us a lot. Blaming them feels justified. But blame is temporary. It's a temporary relief that will cost you long-term peace. You know why? Because you haven't dealt with the thing. All you did was kind of right? You just heaved it out of your heart and heaved it out of your soul and dumped it onto somebody else. It didn't deal with anything. The next person who says the same thing, the next person who does the same thing, the next person who comes your way and behaves in a way that you don't really like all that much is going to cause you to fall into the same trap and get triggered again, and you're going to push someone else away. How do I know this to be true? Because I've done it. I've done it. I've lived it. Blame is temporary relief that costs you long-term peace because you haven't dealt with the thing. And you know who's better at dealing with the thing than anyone else you will ever meet? Jesus. Jesus is the king of this. In fact, it was one of the greatest promises that he made to us, was that he came that we may have life, and life to the full. And this does not feel like life to the full, does it? Does this way of life, does this way of interacting with people, does this bring you joy? Does it make you feel full of life? No. One more hard statement on this, and I'm going to move on. If your peace depends on someone else behaving right, you're never going to be free. If your peace is dependent on everyone else acting the way you want them to act, I am so sorry, but you are never going to be at peace. Right? Because your reactions are highly dependent on people you can't control. And some of them don't want what's good for you. And if all you can think about is making them happy or getting justified or having them behave the way you want, you will never, ever, ever, ever be at peace. Let me say something hard but important, okay? When things trigger you, when life happens and it touches a wound and it's something you haven't fully surrendered over to Jesus, or it's something that, Jesus follower, maybe it's just something you haven't processed or whatever, okay? when that touches that nerve, when that hits that thing, when you find yourself triggered, your response is your responsibility, not theirs. And their response is their responsibility, not yours. And the freedom that can be found right here will change your life. And this is not a Drew thing. I didn't make this up. This is a Jesus thing. This is a straight out of first century church ethic thing. And it's something we've forgotten because we so desire for everyone to think like us or act like us or look like us or whatever like us. And when they don't vote like us, when they don't whatever, we find ourselves at odds and we have to change their minds. Now, hear me. Again, all my bias is on the table. I'm a Jesus follower and I have tons of opinions about tons of things. And there are hills that I'll die on and there are hills that I won't. But I'm not going to define what those things are, and I'm not going to allow my emotions to define what those things are. I'm going to allow God to do that. And my response in those situations is my responsibility. And allowing God to transform how I'll respond in those situations, that is my responsibility. God will do the work. God will change the heart. God will shift the situation. God will soften my wounds, heal my junk, fix my wiring, but I have to let him do it, and that is my responsibility. That is your responsibility in your life. And Paul said one more thing about this that I want to give you before we go. And the reason I want to do this is because it's kind of a restatement of what we talked about in Flip the Script. You know, the series we did before this was called Flip the Script. It was all about the fruit of the Spirit and how allowing the Holy Spirit to work in us actually brings us to a place where our lives are better and that there's some things that will show up when we allow God to work. Paul sort of restates that, but he does the list a little bit differently. And the way he does it this way makes it so clear and so obvious that there's a glue that holds all this together. And that glue is really important to this conversation about triggers. Listen to what he says to the Colossians. Therefore, as God's chosen people, and he's just speaking to Jesus followers, okay? Like you're paying attention. So if you're not a Jesus follower, I suppose what I'm about to say to you, you don't have to take this, okay? You can listen to it and take it or not. But if you're a Jesus follower, this is a promise made to you. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion. Literally take the shirt of compassion and put it on, right? Put it on, wear it. Clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Those words sound familiar to those of you that have been following along, right, in the Flip the Script. But then he says this. This is so awesome. Bear with each other and forgive one another. If any of you has a grievance against someone, forgive. Ooh, Paul, why'd you say this? Forgive as the Lord forgave you. Oh, Paul, why'd you do that to me for? Oh, twist the knife, why don't you, Paul? I don't know if it's just me being 40 now. I don't know if it's just me, like, I'm not sure what has caused this to happen to me. I'm not sure if it's just reality or, you know, it's just the lens has been shifted or, you know, the veil's been taken off my eyes. I'm not really sure. But the more I realize, like more and more I realize today that I have been forgiven for far more than the offenses I'm taking from someone else. I have offended and I have broken and I have messed up in more significant ways in my own life than the things I refuse to forgive in someone else. And God forgave me anyway. Who am I? Who am I to say no, I won't take it? And you know what the other operative thing that's happening in this is? This whole statement from Paul means none of this happens by accident. Okay? Compassion doesn't happen by accident. This isn't something that like, oh, you know, they triggered me, but by golly, I happened to just go, you know, it's okay, and that was it. No, of course not. What the Apostle Paul is saying is that when you go into those situations that you know will trigger you, pre-decide how you're going to react. Make a pre-decision. This is why I wanted you to pay attention to your triggers last week. If you pay attention to those things that just stomp on you, maybe it's, again, somebody who votes different than you or somebody that talks different than you or that person who chews gum too loud or whatever, and in those situations where you know you're going to be most likely to be triggered, pre-decide how you will react and make that pre-decision. Jesus followers, make that pre-decision to be compassion and love and virtue and all those other great things that God says we should live into. You make a pre-decision. You add this to your prayer list. God, I'm going into traffic today. You know how I am. I don't want to be that way. God, would you just, as I navigate this and people cut me off, as I know that they will you just help me to be compassionate and patient? Right? You take this in your prayer life, and that was a silly one, okay? But listen, you know the depth of these things for you. And if you've paid any attention at all in your own life, you know what wound has caused those things. And you know where you're most likely to trip up. The thing you don't know is when it's coming. None of us know that. You don't know when it's coming. And so you just again, you go through it and it happens and you get big or you get loud or you run away or whatever, and then you got to move to a new town or you got to find new friends or whatever, and then you start over. And then a year or so in, it happens again and again and again because of stuff that you have not pre-decided to allow God to show you how to react. That you haven't pre-decided your response. You've allowed your emotions to dictate your reaction. And then Paul says, this is so good, and over all of this, over all of these virtues, in fact, the thing that glues, that holds it all together, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members one of the body you were called to peace. If you don't pre-decide what rules your heart, your emotions will, and that will not take you where you want to go. If you don't make a pre-decision, it will not take you where you want to go. And he says, look, this one more thing about this. This is so big. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. And you know what he finishes with? This is so good. And be thankful. And be thankful. Realize what you've been forgiven for. Realize the person you are because of what God has done. Realize the opportunities and the situations, the grace and mercy you've already received. Realize what your life actually looks like. Put on a proper lens about the way you view where you are and whose you are. Because I think gratitude is the practice of letting peace win. Gratitude is the practice of letting peace win. So here's my challenge for this week, okay? Last week I wanted you to pay attention. This week, clothe yourselves before your buttons get pushed. Clothe yourselves before your buttons get pushed. Before you go to that meeting, before you drive out in traffic, before you have that conversation, before you go to school or to work, before you walk into that place, before you sit down with that person, clothe yourselves with compassion and love and gratitude before your buttons get pushed. 3 questions to help you make this happen. Number 1, who in your life tends to push your buttons? Why do you think that is? This ought to be fun. Talk this over with somebody. Number 2, how do your emotional reactions reflect or challenge your confidence in God? Number 3, what is one relationship where you could respond with surprising grace this week? I'd love to pray for you. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for these people gathered here and for the gift of grace that you've given all of us, for the reality that we are people transformed by your grace. If we've accepted Jesus as our Lord and Savior, we are new people, and we have been offered new life to the full. And some of us have decided not to live into that. We've gotten I've got eternal salvation, or I get out of hell free card or whatever, God, and we have ignored all the great things you want to do in our lives right now, and that must stop if we're going to have peace. Let Christ rule in our hearts this week. For those that are on the fence about faith, God, let them take something that they've heard today and realize you have better for them if they'll just say yes. Lord, we love you. We trust you. We ask it all in Jesus' name. Amen.